So I'm on a message board, like an email list, and someone posted a question today that is a variant of a question I get quite often, and I'll read the question and then I'll give you my answer. So the question here is, and I'm quoting now: I'm in the beginning stages to write a book. I have more research to do than I have time for. What does having a research assistant look like when you're not a full-time staff member at a think tank? How does one go about finding one? Is it possible to have a volunteer? If not, parentheses, who wants to work for free? Does one just pay out of pocket? So this is a question that I have thought a lot about and I have a lot of experience with because I've been on both sides of the coin. I've been a research assistant on many different books, and then I've also been an author and a ghostwriter, and I've been on the hiring side of the equation as well. And I think obviously sort of inherent in this question is a more general one, which is how do you write a book when you don't have enough time? And so I'm going to do a video on this question that I think will be valuable, not to people who are writing a book, but also people who are generally readers of books and are interested in the book market, because I think a lot of what I talk about here will be informative in helping you think about why the book market looks the way it does. Like why, when you walk into a bookstore, why are there some kinds of books on the shelf and why are there not others? So the first question is, so let's take the first part of it. I'm in the beginning stages of trying to write a book, but I have more research to do than I have time for. So I think, whenever one is asking or feels like they want to write a book, but they don't have enough of something, whether it's enough money, enough time, enough whatever, there's usually there's often a deeper issue lurking behind this issue, which is that the concept of the book itself may or may not be thought out. So like when people come to me and they express interest in writing a book, but they're trying to figure out what's involved with it, I usually respond by sort of asking three questions in return. I say, one, why are you writing a book? What's the purpose? What goal are you trying to achieve in the course of writing the book? Number two, how much time of your own do you have to spend on the book? And then number three, how much of a budget do you have? How much money do you have to spend on the book? And I found that when people have written a book or tried to write a book, they immediately understand like why I'm asking these questions, and they can figure it out. But I found often that for first-time authors in particular, when they're confronted with these questions, it comes as a bit of a shock and it's uncomfortable, and they're kind of confused / reluctant to answer. And I think that I don't fully know why this question poses discomfort, but I think that what it ultimately comes down to a large extent, is that when you ask someone like, okay, I need to buy a new pair of shoes, or I need to go get a meal at a restaurant, and you ask like, how much are you willing to pay? People can usually kind of intuit an answer to that. But when it comes to a book, it's a little bit more of a complicated question, because I think one reason is that by the time people think about writing a book, they usually have like something emotionally vested in the project, or their ego is attached to the project, and so being confronted with these dollars and cents logistics kind of questions sort of provoke a certain emotional response. But I think the other factor here too is that it's hard to actually like know the value of a book. And what I would say generally, this is not always true, but generally with first-time authors in particular, my sense, not always, but generally, is that people, on the one hand, they overestimate how much money the book will bring in, or another way to put that is that they underestimate how much they'll actually lose doing it. in terms of time and also financial investment. But the second part of it is that it's pretty hard. It's hard to quantify the value of writing a book. One, because the most of the value of writing a book either is non-monetary. It has to do with brand building, just getting an idea out there and making an impact. Whatever it is. So a lot of that comes back to that first question I posed earlier, which is, what is the goal? What are you trying to achieve? And then related to that is that some of these things are just hard to predict, and especially on a certain timeline. So for example, if you write a book and then that book leads like 5 years later to some kind of a big breakthrough opportunity, how do you quantify that at the outset, or how do you predict it? It's a hard exercise. But I think that the vast majority of these kinds of questions which seem to be tactical or logistical, there's usually a more serious set of answers that one has to answer. And so when you think about these three questions, one, what is your goal in writing the book? Two, how much time do you have of your own? And then three, how much of a budget you have? At that point, a different set of questions arise, which is basically, one, is the book even worth doing? I mean, is the book the right mechanism or vehicle in your circumstances to accomplish whatever you want to? And I found that, like, very often, my response will be, well, yeah, there might be the ingredients of a book here, but maybe start out by writing a blog post, maybe do an op-ed, maybe do an article, maybe just record a YouTube video and see what kind of a response you get. And it's very, very telling how people react to that. And it's a very good indicator of how serious people actually are about the project, because if you are really serious about the project, then you'll welcome the opportunity to do like a 800-word blog post, or even like a 1,500-word essay, because that way you'll get the feedback, you'll test out the market of whether or not people actually want this thing and whether or not there's enough merit in the project. So that's one dilemma that comes to the fold. Now, if you decide after going through that actually a book is the right way to get this information out there, really knowing your constraints, like knowing the time, etc., can help you shape the scope of the project. And so if you're finding that you want to do a book, but you fear that you don't have enough time or money, maybe the answer is not actually, or maybe the dilemma here is not actually the limitations you have in terms of resources. The answer here may be that the scope of the project is too big. Maybe you'd be better off like narrowing the scope of the subject, doing a deeper dive into a smaller topic or a smaller area, or maybe maybe you want to write a book that's a little bit less research intensive. Maybe there are different creative things you can do just to make the project more manageable. Now, as this person is sort of inquiring here, let's say you go through this and you realize, okay, I want to do a book, and I know the scope and everything, and I want to try to hire help. So how do you go about getting a research assistant? So I'll just repeat the question here that I got. What does having a research assistant look like when you're not a full-time staff member at a think tank? How does one go about finding one? Is it possible to have a volunteer? If not, and parentheses, who wants to work for free? Does one just pay out of pocket? So the answer here to how to get a research assistant, it again comes down almost entirely to the question of what degree of complexity are we dealing with in terms of the kind of research that you need done. And what I would say is that there's a pretty wide range of things that one can have a research assistant do on a book. The absolute minimal kind of a project or research task might be that, let's say you know exactly what book has a certain source that you need a reference to, quote from, exactly where it is. Like, you just literally need someone to run to the library for you and look the thing up and give you that information. or something like that, which basically requires very little, if any, work. And the easiest thing to do here might be just to go on Upwork or one of these outsourcing sites, and you can find someone for dirt cheap to do this stuff. I remember, for example, like when I was thinking about putting together a book proposal for a book on gifted children, one of the things that I wanted to do was look into like what kind of publishers or agents might be appropriate. So I put together a massive bibliography of related titles. And then I just basically needed someone to go through each of the acknowledgments in these books and see if they had any information on the agents and the publishers. And so this wasn't like particularly thought work that could be done, just like a little grind in terms of the amount of time. And I think I found someone on Upwork for like $5 or $10, and it was a college student at a university in New York. And the reason she did it was not because it was a particularly good use of time, but basically that they were trying to build up their reputation and build up their profile on Upwork to be able to get more work. And so they viewed this assignment as a loss leader. And that was that. Now, the difficulty comes where you have research work that's more intensive or involved. And here, the basic question to think about is, I would say there are basically two big questions. One is, what kind of talent do you need to be able to do the work? And here, I think the relevant questions are, how much of a time commitment do you need? How intelligent a person do you need? How much of a subject matter expert do you need? And so this will vary. I mean, often what you find with a so-called research assistant is actually you realize that not only do they bring research assistants to the table, but they also bring the ability to ghostwrite different sections for you. They have the ability to give you constructive feedback. They can frame an issue in a certain way. They can offer editing. They can do a lot of different things that you can get with a high quality research assistant. And then the other thing to think about is what kind of a relationship do you want to have with a research assistant? In the first example I gave, is it just purely a transactional thing where you need something done and that's it? Or is the nature of the project, is it one where you might have to like confide certain like sensitive information where you need a degree of discretion, or is it is it the kind of thing where you may not be entirely comfortable managing someone and you need someone flexible, or do you view hiring a research assistant as like the early phases of a long-term relationship or collaborator where you're investing in a person, they're investing in you, and then maybe you can both work on something together? These are all like difficult questions, and they're going to depend on a case-by-case basis, but these are the kind of questions that I think are worth addressing. Now, okay, so then the question becomes, well, how do you go about finding one, and is it possible to get someone to work for free? Okay, so the first question on how much to be spending, can you get someone to work for you for free? And here, I mean, I guess it depends what the definition of free is. I mean, if by free we're saying, do you not have to write them a check? Sure, it is possible. But if the question is, can you get someone to work for you without putting anything of value on the table, the answer is emphatically no. Okay, so what does it mean to get someone to work for free? So I've basically, by a certain definition, worked for free on any number of books. I remember early on, the way I got involved with this business was basically that I had decided going into college and then in college that I had certain goals. So one was that I wanted to break into elite conservative circles. Another goal I had was to try to work in government as a political appointee, and then I also knew I wanted to go to law school. And I realized for any of these three goals, I made a certain network and a certain set of relationships. And so what I did was I figured out like who are the people who would be valuable to have as mentors and as people as professional colleagues. And then I looked into who was writing a book, and I basically said, rather than asking for like $15 an hour or whatever a research assistant in college might be able to charge, what the calculation I made was that I'm going to offer to work for free, but what I'm actually getting in exchange is something that is very hard to put a price tag on, which is the ability to be a confidant of someone relatively powerful or influential, get access to their network, get them to write a letter of recommendation, get the benefit of their mentorship and wisdom. And so if you, this was obviously a win-win for both of us. It was a win for the person, but it was a win for me in the sense that, this investment that I made early on, I mean, even today, like nearly 15 years later, a lot of the clients I have now who are paying a decent amount of money are stemmed from or were people who I got to know during this period. So the question, as you're thinking about whether to hire someone, is one, I mean, think about really whether or not you have the budget and how much of a monetary value there is. But two, do you have the ability to bring, if you're not ready to pay a fair market value, the question is, do you have the ability to bring something to the table or something of value to the person who you want to recruit? And a big thing that ends up happening here as you're thinking through that question is, the other question here on the table, how do you go about finding one? If you really think about the value problem you have to bring to the table, that question of how you find the right person answers itself, because obviously you're going to be in a position to add more value to someone who has a lot to gain by what you have to offer, and also has a certain interest or stake in what you're writing about. So, for example, let's say you're a former government official and you want to write a book about Russia. Well, like the value proposition of that project is obviously going to be very high for let's say a graduate student who is working on their PhD on Russia, and their goal is to get a job in government where they could not only add value and have an interest in the subject you're writing about, but they could also benefit from the network and mentorship that you're offering. On the other hand, the value proposition is probably going to be a lot less if you're just going for some freelancer out there who's smart but knows absolutely nothing about foreign or whatever. They could do the work, but it's ultimately a transactional sort of a relationship. But to answer the question more directly, where can you find someone? I would say that probably one of the best things you can do, you can go to think about who are the professors in your field or area, and email them. They obviously have a network of younger people who can, who they can refer you to. Another thing would be to look at other books that have been written on your subject and go through the acknowledgments. And usually if you read the acknowledgments carefully, there will be some kind of mention of the researchers or the interns or whatever who worked on the book. You can just post an ad around in either in your network or on more generic sites like Upwork or Craigslist or whatever, and you'll get, I mean, the talent you'll get will be hit or miss, but you'll get people. Ask for references from other colleagues and friends, and usually they'll be able to provide someone. But again, the big point here is that behind these tactical questions about writing a book are usually much deeper, more strategic issues and questions to work out. And many of these tactical issues will begin to work themselves out. So let me know what you think of this video. I'm particularly interested to hear from people who have either written a book already or thinking about the problem. And I'm curious if this advice sort of resonates. And also, if you need more practical help on writing a book, definitely reach out to me. Maybe I can help you with it, or if not, I've been doing this kind of work long enough that I may be able to provide you with the right references or referrals for the talent you're looking for. Okay.